In 2019, Ferrari had built a rocket. On the straights, nobody could touch them. Charles Leclerc and Sebastian Vettel would simply disappear into the horizon. Their rivals watched helplessly as that red engine delivered power that seemed impossible. Until a single technical directive from the FIA turned that rocket into a midfield car, overnight. What changed wasn't the driver, it wasn't the track, it wasn't even a new part on the car, it was one line in the rulebook. And this is Formula One's dirty little secret. Every time engineers find a genius way to cheat, the entire sport has to evolve to catch them. Today, we're breaking down the smartest and sometimes most dangerous cheats that force the FIA to rewrite the rulebook. From fuel tricks in the 80s to industrial espionage and deliberate crashes. Because if you look closely at the current F1 regulations, you'll find a graveyard of old tricks. And every single rule has a story behind it. Let's get into it. Before we dive into the cases, I need to explain something fundamental about Formula One. There's a philosophy that guides every engineer, every designer, every technical director in this sport. Everything that is not explicitly prohibited is permitted. Sounds simple, right? But think about what that actually means. You have hundreds of brilliant engineers with budgets of hundreds of millions of dollars, whose only mission is to find an advantage. And they will read every comma, every word, every loophole in that rulebook. The result? A constant arms race between those who write the rules and those who find ways around them. Sometimes the line between creative interpretation and cheating is so thin that even the FIA can't define it. But in other cases, well, there's absolutely no doubt. Let's start with what drives everything in F1, fuel and power. The turbo era, the 1980s. The engines were absolute monsters, and the FIA tried to control this madness in a simple way by limiting the fuel tank to 220 liters. Seems reasonable, doesn't it? You can only carry 220 liters, so your maximum power has a ceiling. But the engineers looked at this rule and thought, okay, 220 liters, but what if we put more fuel into those 220 liters? Basic physics. Liquids contract when they cool down. So teams started cooling their fuel to absurd temperatures. We're talking 30, 40 degrees below zero. The liquid would shrink, more fuel molecules would fit in the same volume, and when it warmed up inside the car, you effectively had more fuel than allowed. It was genius. It was completely dangerous. Because when you heat ultra-cooled fuel inside a sealed tank, it expands. And if it expands too much, the tank can explode. Literally. Imagine sitting on top of a fuel tank that could become a bomb if the temperature rises too quickly. The FIA took their time, but eventually created specific rules about minimum fuel temperature during refueling. Today, when you see those giant hoses during pit stops, there's a temperature sensor right there. But that wasn't the only way to cheat with fuel. 1994. The Benetton of Michael Schumacher was dominating the championship, and part of that dominance came from absurdly fast pit stops. Too fast. The refueling hose had a safety filter. This filter prevented fuel from flowing too quickly, specifically to avoid accidents. Benetton removed the filter. Without the filter, fuel entered 15 to 20% faster. Each pit stop was fractions of a second shorter. Over the course of a race, that could be the difference between victory and second place. Until Hockenheim. During Jos Verstappen's pit stop, yes, Max's father, the fuel sprayed too fast, made contact with some heat source, and the car became a fireball. Verstappen escaped with minor burns. He was lucky. The investigation discovered the filter was missing. Benetton presented a letter from the manufacturer saying they had authorized the removal. They escaped severe punishment, but the image damage was done. And the FIA? They rewrote the pit equipment rules. Today, every component is homologated and inspected. But the most sophisticated fuel cheat? That came 25 years later. Back to 2019. Ferrari on the straights was unbeatable. At Spa, at Monza, that engine simply delivered power nobody could match. Red Bull got suspicious, and Christian Horner did something brilliant. Instead of directly accusing Ferrari, he went to the FIA with 3 questions. 3 hypothetical scenarios of how a team could bypass the fuel flow measurement system. The F1 flow meter works like this. It measures how many kilograms of fuel per hour enter the engine. The limit is 100 kilograms per hour. If you exceed that, you're cheating. But the sensor doesn't measure continuously. It measures in pulses. Every fraction of a second, it looks at how much fuel has passed. The theory? Ferrari had found a way to drink extra fuel in the blind intervals between measurements. Every 0.45 milliseconds that the sensor wasn't looking, the engine would take an additional gulp. Sounds impossible to execute, but we're talking about engineering at the highest level in the world. The FIA issued technical directives clarifying that any system bypassing the measurement would be illegal. And in the next race, Ferrari lost straight-line speed. dramatically. What came next was even stranger. The FIA announced a confidential agreement with Ferrari. Nobody knows exactly what was in that agreement. The other teams were furious. To this day, it's one of the most controversial episodes in recent history. And in 2020, Ferrari was a disaster. Coincidence? The engineers at other teams don't think so. Let's travel further back in time. 1982, Brazilian Grand Prix. F1 had a simple rule: minimum car weight. You couldn't race with a car lighter than the limit because that would give unfair advantage in acceleration and braking. Nelson Piquet in the Brabham and Keke Rosberg in the Williams had an idea. What if the car was heavy at the start but light during the race? They installed 30-liter water tanks. Officially, it was to cool the brakes. In practice, it was disposable ballast. The car would start at legal weight. During the race, the brake-cooling water was gradually ejected. The car became 30 kilograms lighter, an advantage estimated at more than 1 second per lap. At the end of the race, before the official weigh-in, the teams would simply refill the water tanks. Genius? Absolutely. The FIA eventually caught some teams, but enforcement was inconsistent. John Watson, for example, also had a similar system and wasn't punished. The result? Today, weighing happens at random moments, including right after the checkered flag, and there are specific rules about fluid systems in the car. Aerodynamics. This is where 90% of F1 car development happens, and it's where the gray zones are thickest. The basic rule says aerodynamic elements cannot move. No moving parts on the wing. The problem? Everything moves when you have air passing at 300 kilometers per hour. Lotus, back in the 70s, pioneered creating wings that were rigid during the FIA's static tests, but flexed at high speed. At low speed, the wing generated maximum downforce for corners. At high speed, it would lay down slightly, reducing drag for the straights. The trick evolved with materials. When carbon fiber entered F1, engineers discovered they could align the fibers in specific ways. The material would pass the FIA's static load tests, but under real racing conditions, it would twist and bend exactly as they wanted. It's a battle that continues to this day. Every year, the FIA creates more rigorous tests, and every year the teams find ways to pass the tests while still extracting advantage on track. The difference between allowed flexibility and cheating is often decided in political meetings, not technical ones. This case is special because it combines multiple cheats into one. Tyrrell, 1984. The team was struggling and needed any possible advantage. First problem, minimum weight. Solution? Water tanks, similar to what we saw in 1982, but with a twist. The water wasn't just water. It had toluene mixed in, a component of aviation fuel. In theory, it was cooling water. In practice, as it was injected into the engine during the race, it gave an extra power boost. And to compensate for the weight of the water tanks, what did they do? They put lead pellets inside the car. Lead that could be ejected during the race. When the FIA found out, the punishment was severe. Tyrrell was excluded from the entire championship. All points nullified. It was one of the harshest punishments in history, and it established a precedent. When cheating is blatant and multifaceted, the FIA doesn't hesitate to apply the maximum penalty. Singapore, 2008. Night race, street circuit, high chance of safety car. Fernando Alonso had made a strange strategy call. Super early pit stop in the first few laps. It made no tactical sense unless a safety car appeared right after. And it did. Nelsinho Piquet, Alonso's teammate at Renault, crashed alone into a wall. Safety car. The field bunched up. Alonso, who had just refueled, was suddenly in the effective lead. He won the race. A year later, when Nelsinho was fired from the team, he revealed the truth. The crash was deliberate. Flavio Briatore and Pat Symonds, the team bosses, had instructed him to crash at that specific point on that specific lap to create the safety car that would benefit Alonso. Think about what this means. A Formula One team instructed a driver to crash on purpose, on a street circuit, with spectators, marshals, other cars on track. It could have been a tragedy. Briatore received a lifetime ban from F1, later overturned. Symonds was banned for 5 years. Renault escaped harsher punishment because they cooperated with the investigation. And Alonso? He claimed he knew nothing. He kept the victory and was never punished.
Do you still count that race as a proper race victory for yourself?
Yes, I do.
Even though the team effectively manufactured it?
Well, I think that's interpretation. There are many interpretations how you can win the race. That was in very early stage of the race, and it was a long race to do, and the car was performing well. I did no mistakes, and I still counting.
Crashgate changed how F1 looks at sporting integrity, and it opened the door for deeper investigations into what happens behind the scenes at teams. If Crashgate was about manipulating a single race, Spygate was about stealing an entire team's DNA. 2007, McLaren was at war with Ferrari on track. Hamilton against Raikkonen and Massa. Alonso, also at McLaren, but already in open conflict with the team and with Hamilton. Behind the scenes, something much bigger was happening. Nigel Stepney was one of Ferrari's most respected engineers. He had been a fundamental part of the Schumacher era, of the consecutive titles, but he was frustrated. He had spent years waiting for a promotion that never came. Stepney started passing information to Mike Coughlin, a McLaren engineer. These weren't hints. They were 780 pages of technical documents, drawings, specifications, strategies. The leak was only discovered because Coughlin's wife took the documents to a photocopy shop in Woking. The shop employee was a Ferrari fan. He recognized the logo on the documents. He wrote to Ferrari. The rest was a political nuclear explosion. The FIA investigated. They discovered the data had circulated among McLaren members. The team was fined $100 million, the largest fine in sports history, and excluded from the Constructors' Championship. But here's where it gets complicated. Alonso, already at war with Ron Dennis, used the internal emails as a weapon. He threatened to reveal evidence linking McLaren to the stolen data. The FIA reopened the case with new evidence, those emails. Hamilton lost the 2007 title by 1 point, with mechanical problems in the final races that still generate suspicion today. Internal sabotage? Hamilton said years later that he knows things he cannot talk about. Mercedes, who supplied engines to McLaren, ended up paying part of the fine. The relationship never recovered. A few years later, Mercedes decided to create their own team. They bought Braun GP, and the era of dominance we know began. It's a direct line. Spygate, McLaren-Mercedes deterioration, Mercedes team, 8 consecutive constructors' titles. And Nigel Stepney?
Since the FIA was investigating in
he was hit by a truck on a British highway. The cause of death was classified as an open verdict. Many suspect
retirement
suicide.
of Michael Schumacher,
Some raise conspiracy theories.
it is also announced that Ross Brawn
we'll never know.
will be on sabbatical.
Now, to give us a breather, let's talk about cheats that could only happen in another era. When F1 was more, let's say, artisanal. 1975, Swedish Grand Prix. Vittorio Brambilla needed a good grid position. Back then, lap time was measured by an electronic loop buried in the asphalt. When the car passed over it, the sensor would detect and record the time. Brambilla, or someone on his team, discovered that the metal pit board, if positioned over the sensor, would also trigger the system. So during qualifying, someone simply waved the pit board over the sensor at the right moment. Brambilla conquered pole position. They eventually figured it out, but admit it, that's creative. 1977, German Grand Prix. Hans Heyer didn't qualify for the race. His car simply wasn't fast enough. But Hans really wanted to race at home, so he waited for the start, entered the pit lane, and joined the race anyway. He raced 9 laps before his engine broke and he retired. When the stewards looked at the results, they saw a car that shouldn't exist. Hans Heyer entered history as the only driver to be disqualified for not qualifying, retiring from the race, and being excluded, all in the same Grand Prix. These cases seem like jokes today, but they show how F1 has evolved. From a sport where you could literally cut corners to one where every millisecond of fuel is monitored. Look closely at the F1 rulebook and you'll find a graveyard of old tricks. Minimum fuel temperature during refueling? Someone tried to freeze the tank. Dynamic tests for flexible wings? Someone created carbon fiber that only bent at speed. Random weighing after races? Someone dumped water during the race. More precise flow sensors? Someone found the blind milliseconds. None of these rules appeared by accident. Each one exists because at some point, someone in Formula One tried to cheat. And 2026 is coming. New regulations, active aerodynamics, more software, more sensors, more points where a line of code can make the difference. The next big cheats probably won't involve water tanks or removed filters. There'll be algorithms. There'll be exploits in energy control software. There'll be things we can't even imagine yet. Because this is the truth about Formula One. The most important race doesn't happen on track. It happens on the drawing boards, in the wind tunnels, in the lines of code. And as long as there's a world championship at stake, there will always be someone brilliant enough, or desperate enough, to find the next loophole. The question isn't if someone will try again. It's where the next loophole is hiding, and which genius or villain will find it first. So what do you think? Is this engineering genius or pure cheating? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, you know what to do. Like, subscribe, hit that bell. See you in the next one.